Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what I think could be one of the most significant developments of the entire war between Russia and Ukraine. Not because of one spectacular explosion or one major oil refinery being hit, but because Ukraine appears to have found a completely new way of attacking the Russian economy. Over the past couple of weeks, Ukraine has launched what appears to be its largest ever coordinated campaign against Russian commercial shipping in the Sea of Azov. More than 100 vessels have been attacked during this period, and Russia has been forced to consider rerouting parts of its grain exports. Shipping has been disrupted, insurance costs are rising, captains of the ships are becoming increasingly nervous and cautious about sailing. And if all of this sounds familiar, well, it should, because we've spent the past few months discussing exactly the same phenomenon in the Strait of Hormuz next to Iran. Sometimes the threat of attack becomes almost as economically damaging as the attack itself. We'll explain exactly what's happening, why it matters, and why this could become another major headache for the Russian economy later in the video. But before we get into the details, could I ask anybody that hasn't subscribed yet to please hit that subscribe button? Also, if you could give me a thumbs up for this video, that would be fantastic. And if you could hype the video, you can see that little hype symbol next to the thumbs up. If you could hit that, then it means that this video will be spread to more people on YouTube, and hopefully more people will watch it. Okay, so let's get into the details. Over the past couple of weeks, Ukraine has launched an unprecedented campaign against Russian shipping operating in the Sea of Azov. Between the 5th and the 14th of July, Ukrainian drone units struck 116 vessels, including oil tankers, bulk carriers, and tugboats. Rather than trying to sink large number of ships, Ukrainian officials say the objective was to disable vessels, disrupt logistics, and force Russia to rethink how it moves fuel, grain, and military supplies. Now let's put that into the context. The Sea of Azov may not be a body of water that many people are aware of, but strategically it's hugely important. It connects Russian ports on the Don River and the Volga-Don Canal to the Black Sea. It's one of Russia's key export corridors. Around 25% of Russia's grain exports pass through this route on a normal day. Russia is the world's largest wheat exporter. Millions of tons of grain move through these ports every single year. So any disruption immediately has economic consequences for Russia. The attacks became so disruptive that Russia temporarily halted shipping through the Don Azov channel last week before beginning to consider alternative export options. Officials are now preparing contingency plans to reroute grain exports away from this area. And if we just think about what that means from Russia's perspective, if you suddenly have to reroute ships, everything becomes more expensive. Voyages take longer, therefore fuel consumption increases because you're having to travel further distances. Ports become congested if you're trying to put more vessels to other ports. Loading schedules change. Rail and road transport have to pick up additional cargo. So every single step of these adjustments costs more money. But perhaps more importantly than the direct disruption is the uncertainty, because shipping companies don't simply ask, has a ship been attacked? They ask, what are the chances that my ship will be attacked? That distinction is incredibly important. We've seen exactly the same thing play out in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran hasn't physically stopped every single tanker from sailing. It hasn't attacked every single ship. Instead, repeated attacks, seizures, missile launches, and drone strikes have created uncertainty and risk. That uncertainty has driven up marine insurance premiums. Some ship owners have delayed their sailings. Some have chosen alternative routes altogether. Some crews have become reluctant to enter the area. The economic impact extends far beyond the vessels that are actually being struck. Fear itself becomes the economic weapon. The same dynamic is now happening around Russia. If commercial captains begin viewing the Sea of Azov as a high-risk area, then insurance companies will react, war risk premiums will increase, shipping companies demand higher freight rates, some operators may refuse contracts altogether, ports become less efficient, exporters face delays, and buyers begin questioning the reliability of deliveries. That uncertainty threads through the supply chain. This is particularly important because Ukraine doesn't necessarily need to destroy dozens of ships. It simply needs to make operating in the region sufficiently risky that the economics begin working against Russia. Modern economic warfare isn't about total destruction. It's about increasing costs, reducing efficiency, creating uncertainty, and gradually eroding profitability. The latest reports say that Ukraine's drone campaign specifically targeted what officials described as Russia's feeder fleet. These are smaller vessels that transfer oil and refined products from ports connected to the Volga-Don Canal and the Sea of Azov before cargo is loaded onto much larger tankers in the Black Sea for export. If those feeder vessels are disrupted, the whole export chain breaks down. It's a bit like removing delivery vans from a supermarket distribution network. The warehouses may still be operating, but getting products to customers suddenly becomes much harder. There's also an important military dimension. Ukraine says that maritime routes supply occupied Crimea and Russian military forces operating in southern Ukraine. So if shipping becomes less reliable, Russia becomes increasingly dependent on railways and roads. And the problem with that? Well, Ukraine has already become very effective at striking both of those targets with its drones. So concentrating more logistics onto land routes potentially increases the vulnerability further. Russia, unsurprisingly, is seeing this situation very differently to Ukraine. Russian officials have accused Ukraine of conducting terrorist attacks against civilian shipping and commercial infrastructure. Ukraine rejects that categorically. Kyiv argues these vessels and logistic routes are supporting Russia's war effort and therefore represent legitimate military targets. As with many aspects of this conflict, the legal and political interpretations depend very much on which side you're sitting. From an economic perspective, however, the effects are easier to observe. Russia is already facing repeated attacks on oil refineries, repeated attacks on fuel storage depots and on railway infrastructure, and now repeated attacks on commercial shipping. Individually, all of those things might be manageable from Russia's perspective, but collectively they're creating friction across the whole of the Russian economy. There's also another interesting angle here. Markets often focus on spectacular events, a refinery explosion, a bridge collapsing, a ship sinking, but economists often pay much closer attention to something else: transaction costs. If every shipment suddenly costs more to insure, more to transport, takes longer to deliver, requires additional security, needs contingency planning, then the competitiveness of those exports will decline. Those costs don't simply disappear. Somebody has to pay for them, usually the producers, the exporters, but ultimately the consumers. This is why I think the comparison with the Strait of Hormuz is so interesting. In both cases, the objective isn't necessarily to close the waterway completely. The objective is to make using it sufficiently risky that the economic consequences become significant. And that changes behaviour, and it changes investment decisions and insurance pricing and shipping patterns, and eventually it changes the whole of your economy. And one final point worth mentioning: Russia's decision to consider rerouting grain exports is in itself an acknowledgement that these attacks are having a direct impact. Governments don't start redesigning export logistics if everything is functioning normally. The fact that contingency plans are already being discussed tells us that this is being taken very seriously in the Kremlin. Whether Ukraine can sustain this campaign over the next few months remains to be seen, and whether Russia can adapt also remains to be seen. But one thing is clear: the battlefield is no longer confined to trenches and missiles. It now extends to supply chains, insurance markets, shipping routes, and the economics of global trade. And if Ukraine can continue increasing the cost of moving Russian exports without having to destroy large numbers of ships, it may have discovered one of the most effective forms of economic warfare that we've seen so far during this conflict. So hopefully you found today's video useful, informative, and most importantly, thought-provoking. If you have enjoyed it, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Please hit that hype button if you can, if you've got the ability to do it. If you haven't used your hypes, I think you get 3 per week or per month, something like that. But I'd appreciate it if you could use one for this video to try and promote it to some more people. That would be great. Thank you so much to everybody that's supporting me. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me YouTube super thanks or signed up as a patron or a member, thank you so much for that support. I really do appreciate it. It does help to keep me motivated and making as many videos as possible.